Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, China's youth jobless rate in July climbed to an 11-month high, nearly 1 in 5 young adults out of work. Experts warn the real number could be even higher. Made in China goods in the crosshairs, the U.S. is expanding its crackdown on slave labor imports to include steel, copper, and other products. Sentence for smuggling American weapons to North Korea. A Chinese national living in California is now facing prison time. And a global milestone, 450 million people have quit the Chinese Communist Party. From around the world, a peaceful movement is shaking up the foundations of authoritarianism. China's economy is struggling across the board, and young people are bearing the brunt. They're facing one of the toughest job markets in nearly a year. On Tuesday, China's National Statistics Bureau reported that the youth unemployment rate in July climbed to nearly 18%. That's the highest level since last August, meaning that currently nearly 1 in 5 young adults in China looking for work are unemployed. But a U.S. business professor is questioning the accuracy of these numbers.
First of all, you can never trust the Chinese Communist government's number, the statistics. They have been known for systematically massaging or even fabricating their stats.
The youth unemployment data targets people aged 16 to 24 who are actively seeking a job. This summer, over 12 million fresh graduates are entering China's already shaken labor market. But the reality may be even tougher.
Actually, in fact, there are some Chinese scholars. There's one notable scholar from Peking University. She actually, I think it's sometime last year, did her own calculation and came up with a youth unemployment number of 47%. I think that's much closer to reality. So this 17% is just far from reality.
Zhang Dandan is a Chinese labor economist and assistant professor at Peking University. Her estimates are far higher than official numbers. Last March, she put China's youth jobless rate at about 47%, while official data reported around 20%. Critics and Chinese economists say China's method of calculating unemployment hardly reflects the full picture, since it excludes a large portion of the population. Rural populations are largely excluded from the data, and the youth unemployment numbers only cover urban areas. The Chinese regime also has significant influence over official data. In 2023, authorities halted releasing data from July to November. And there's another factor making job hunting in China even more challenging.
And I think the government's major drive for pushing AI is for its application in military use, in military, in weapons, in a system, so they can catch up with the U.S. in military technology. On the other side, on the other hand, to say AI, a wider application by Chinese companies of using AI is definitely going to hurt the job market even further. So that's kind of making it more complicated.
Nearly 4 million people registered for master's entrance exams this year, hoping to land jobs with better pay and benefits. But will reality meet their expectations? As China focuses on the AI race with the U.S., many companies have started using AI to replace some skilled positions in fields like translation, banking, and sales. Analysts say this trend could deal a major blow to China's heavily educated labor force. The crackdown on slave labor imports is being expanded to include steel, copper, and other items targeting goods from China. Meanwhile, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and the Department of Justice provided updates on the crime clampdown in Washington, D.C. NTD's Washington correspondent Jason Blair has more.
Steel, lithium, copper, caustic soda, and red dates coming to the U.S. from China are now considered high priority for inspection by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The move is in line with the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says the use of slave labor is repulsive, and we will hold Chinese companies accountable for abuses and eliminate threats its forced labor practices pose to our prosperity. U.S. Secretary of Labor Lori Chavez de Ramirez says in a statement, America First means keeping foreign goods made with forced labor off our shelves and ensuring American businesses aren't put at a disadvantage. The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Labor are members of the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force. The task force published updates to the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act strategy aimed at preventing importing goods, quote, mined, produced, or manufactured using forced labor from China.
The White House is now on the Chinese-owned app TikTok. The Trump administration launched its first official account, even as the app's future in the U.S. remains uncertain. President Trump himself appears in the debut video declaring, "I am your voice." The caption reads, "America, we are back. What's up, TikTok?" The White House says the new account will help spread the president's successes to TikTok's American audience. But the platform's future is still unclear, as Trump has repeatedly extended a deadline for TikTok's Chinese parent company to sell. TikTok is owned by Chinese company ByteDance. In 2023, the Biden administration banned TikTok on government-issued mobile devices due to growing cybersecurity concerns. A Chinese national who lived in Southern California has been sentenced for illegally smuggling weapons. Federal agents say he secretly shipped American firearms, ammunition, and sensitive technology to North Korea over several years. NTD's Christina Corona has the details.
A Chinese national has been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for illegally exporting firearms and military items to North Korea. Prosecutors say 42-year-old Shengwen Wen lived in Ontario, California when he was arrested last December. Wen pleaded guilty in June to acting as an illegal foreign agent and conspiracy to violate U.S. export laws. Investigators say Wen worked under North Korean officials who paid him up to $2 million. The Justice Department says Wen shipped items such as firearms, ammunition, and sensitive technology through the port of Long Beach by using false documents to conceal the cargo. And that he even bought a firearms business in Houston in 2023 and drove weapons to California for shipment overseas. Officials say that in December 2023, Wen claimed one weapon shipment contained a refrigerator. It reached Hong Kong the following month before routed to North Korea. The Department of Justice says he also tried to obtain a civilian airplane engine, thermal imaging systems, and 60,000 rounds of ammunition. Officials say Wen entered the U.S. on a student visa in 2012 and overstayed it after it expired in December 2013. The FBI, Homeland Security, and other federal agencies investigated the case. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
The failures of communism and totalitarian regimes have been proven time and again in the former Soviet Union, Cuba, and Venezuela. Today, China is the only remaining communist regime with the power to challenge the free world. It's posing a serious threat to its own people, to other nations, and to the international order. But a peaceful movement led by a spiritual group has reached a historic milestone. More than 450 million people have renounced all ties to the Chinese Communist Party and its organizations. This effort to peacefully dissolve the Chinese Communist Party has been ongoing for more than 20 years, and it continues to grow.
Recently, the Global Service Center for Quitting the Chinese Communist Party, headquartered in New York, announced a milestone. The number of people who have officially withdrawn from the CCP and all its affiliated organizations has now reached 450 million. To mark this historic milestone, service centers in multiple countries have held events in celebration.
Communism is very bad. We are seeing it in countries like Venezuela and Cuba.
Quitting CCP organizations is the peaceful disintegration of the CCP, bringing down the evil forces.
This peaceful movement to dismantle the Chinese Communist Party began in 2004. It was initiated by Falun Gong practitioners and has since spread across the globe. Over 100 million people around the world practice Falun Gong. Yet the Chinese Communist regime remains the only government to use the full power of the state to suppress and persecute this spiritual group. Back to the movement, through media, online platforms, street booths, and community events, Falun Gong practitioners encourage people to withdraw from the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliated organizations, helping participants break free from the CCP spiritually. This campaign is entirely volunteer-driven, with people dedicating their time and effort to make this a reality.
When joining the Chinese Communist Party, you must raise your fists and swear to dedicate your lives to the party. This oath is truly unlucky.
One of the defining features that sets the Chinese Communist Party apart from other organizations and political parties is the requirement to raise one's fist and swear a solemn oath under its red flag in order to join. Once enrolled, members cannot voluntarily leave unless expelled by the party itself. In a country ruled by the CCP, choosing to withdraw means becoming a social outcast, branded as an outsider or even a threat. This is why the movement allows people to declare their withdrawal using aliases in order to protect their identity while breaking free from the party's control.
Falun Gong's persistence and efforts are admirable. I believe that peaceful, rational, and non-violent is always the right path. You have chosen the right path and stood on the side of historical justice. Thank you for your efforts.
The movement is closely tied to the publication of the book 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party. In November 2004, the Epoch Times published this series of editorials offering a systematic analysis of the Chinese Communist Party, its nature, characteristics, history, and current state. The publication sparked a global wave of people choosing to withdraw from the CCP and all its affiliated organizations. In addition to the movement, the Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP launched another initiative in 2020, the End CCP Global Petition Campaign. To this day, it has gathered support from over 5 million people in the free world.
Unprecedented multilateral meeting at the White House. President Trump met with Ukraine's President Zelensky and 6 European leaders Monday to discuss the war in Ukraine. What role does China play in this conflict, and what are Beijing's concerns? To discuss, NTD's Don Ma was joined by James Gorrie, foreign affairs analyst and author of The China Crisis.
James, ahead of that White House meeting, the German foreign minister who was in Japan said that Russia's war is made possible by Chinese support. And you've talked about this subject on your podcast, The Banana Republican. Can you elaborate further on this point for us?
Sure. Look, China is the #1 importer of Russian oil, which is a huge part of their economy. China exports to Russia as well dual-use technology that can, commercial as well as military uses. They're sending them high-tech laser systems for anti-drone, shooting down drones and so forth from Ukraine. China is playing a huge role, and they are supporting the war. They're enabling Russia to fight this war.
And since we have you here, James, let's go into the nitty-gritty. Do you think China wants this war to continue? Do you think it wants the war to end?
Well, China is on the one hand, is saying that there ought to be peace, but their actions say otherwise. And even their foreign minister, Wang Yi, said in July that China wants the war to continue because it allows or it forces the U.S. focus to remain in Europe and Russia and Ukraine rather than on China. So I think China is a bit concerned, as they should be, that an arrangement is made between the U.S., the NATO, and Europe on one side, the EU, and Ukraine and Russia. If there's peace, that will come at a price, but it also come at benefits. And some of the benefits, I'm sure, will be things like direct foreign investment into Russia, access to Western markets for Russia, other things like that really China can't provide so much. So I think there's a tremendous amount of concern on the one hand, from China, that Trump will be able to, with a peace agreement, turn Russia westward and have Russia questioning the long-term benefits of partnering with China, especially as a junior partner.
What is China's stake in this conflict? Why is it supporting Russia? What is its goal ultimately?
China wants, again, to diminish the American ability, the U.S.'s ability to project power, to have its prestige. So, in other words, a prolonged war will diminish Trump's diplomatic power. If he's not able to bring peace, it will diminish the American influence in the region. It'll diminish the American influence in Asia in terms of its ability to defend Taiwan against a potential Chinese invasion. And it will cast doubt on other security arrangements.
Coming up, issuing warnings, raising tariffs. Washington is pressing India on Russian oil imports. Despite U.S. pressure, Russia says it still plans to meet India's demand. And in the only country to have ever suffered an atomic bomb attack, some in Japan are considering the unthinkable, acquiring nuclear weapons to defend themselves. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Russia says it expects to continue supplying oil to India. That's despite warnings and additional tariffs from the United States. President Trump recently announced an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods as punishment for buying Russian oil. But a Russian official said Tuesday that Moscow expects to export the same amount of oil to India as before. He added that India and Russia will find ways to overcome Trump's latest tariffs. The Kremlin also hopes that trilateral talks will soon take place with India and China, aiming to forge a greater Eurasian partnership. Indian Prime Minister Modi plans to visit China later this month, marking his first trip there in over 7 years. For decades, Japan has relied on the U.S. nuclear umbrella, Washington's promise to defend its allies, including with nuclear weapons. But now, some are starting to think the unthinkable. For the only country to have ever suffered an atomic bomb attack, Japan might have to get those weapons of mass destruction itself. This shift is linked to rising threats from China and North Korea. Here's the story.
I do think that if Japan wants to show the world that it too should be reckoned with, then maybe it really should have nuclear weapons.
Tatsuaki Takahashi grew up in Hiroshima.
The city of Hiroshima lies prostrate after the withering blast.
On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb dropped by the United States left the city in ruins and eventually claimed more than 200,000 lives. The memory of that day spurred pacifist Japan's anti-nuclear movement and the adoption of its 3 non-nuclear principles: never to produce, possess, or allow nuclear weapons in its territory. But 80 years on, that pledge is being tested.
China has been increasing its military spending rapidly, raising concerns that they might invade Taiwan. And if that were to happen, I fear that Japan could be the next target. Then there's North Korea, which keeps shooting missiles. Even though these are tests, they are firing them frequently.
For decades, Japan has relied on the U.S. nuclear umbrella, Washington's promise to defend its allies with the full force of its military, including nuclear weapons. Then, Donald Trump was elected on an America First platform, and his criticism of traditional U.S. allies and alliances has raised concerns over just how reliable American security commitments are. For years, Takahashi said he believed in peace through diplomacy. But now he says Japan may need nuclear weapons to stay safe.
I think it would be quite significant if the US were to withdraw. Japan has the self-defense forces, but they're not an army, so it's impossible for Japan to go on the offensive. That means there would be nothing to protect us. We wouldn't be able to defend ourselves.
And it's not just civilians questioning the status quo. In March, ruling party politician Rui Matsukawa attended a security summit in England. Her observations there reinforced growing concerns about whether the U.S. would come to Japan's aid in a conflict with China.
I think we have to be prepared. The U.S. will basically come into the mode of isolationism. And then they are busy with their own things. They don't care much about the world.
The March meeting in England made Matsukawa realize that U.S. security guarantees were no longer a given. But Japan was in a different position to Europe, she said. It's surrounded by nuclear-armed neighbors: China, which is rapidly expanding its arsenal, North Korea, and Russia.
So the rest of the world needs to think about, during this period, we need to work together and then fill the gap, the vacancy that's created by the US withdrawal in economy or maybe in the world affairs or rule making.
But she says that at a time of geopolitical upheaval, the U.S. remains an important ally, and that it is crucial for Japan to persuade President Trump that it is in America's interest to defend the East Asian country. An official in the Trump administration told Reuters there are no changes in U.S. policy toward Japan. The president and his aides have said they're committed to America's allies in Asia. Japan's foreign ministry says it considers the Trump administration's commitment to the U.S.-Japan alliance to be unwavering. Some Japanese lawmakers and former military commanders suggest deploying American nukes in Japan.
Unlike other countries, it's not easy for Japan to go nukes, and I think it's not really politically possible at this moment. That being said, for example, employing or introducing the American nukes in case of the emergency, that's possible, I think.
Beyond this, some are beginning to think the unthinkable in the only country to have suffered an atomic bomb attack. Japan might have to ultimately acquire those weapons of mass destruction itself. A survivor of the atomic bomb attacks, Kunihiko Sakuma worries about the shifting views in Japan.
Now, I have a feeling that the nuclear taboo is starting to be broken.
He was an infant when the bomb fell on Hiroshima. And he says he cannot understand how a growing number of Japanese people are reaching the conclusion that nuclear weapons could offer protection, given the horrors he and others experienced.
If nuclear weapons are used, it's over, isn't it? That's what I want everyone to understand. What would happen if nuclear weapons were deployed? I want to ask that question to everyone, even President Trump. That's the point I want to make. Possessing nuclear weapons doesn't make us safe. Real security only exists when there is mutual trust between nations. Without that, there's no real sense of security.
Now, as Japan marks the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima, the country faces the question: can it honor the past while preparing for an uncertain future?
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.